Good evening, everyone, and thanks very much for joining us. Vietnam. Some 40 years have passed since America's combat involvement there ended. Countless books and articles have been written of it in the decades since. And the Ken Burns documentary series on Vietnam, which begins here Sunday night on AETN. Well, that doubtless will fuel new interest in the war, that particular war. Our focus, though, tonight is on the history yet to be recorded, the history of Arkansans serving not only in Vietnam, but in all of the nation's military engagements. World War II, Korea, battles in Africa, the Caribbean, in Eastern Europe, and of course Afghanistan and Iraq, all the other combat zones of the Middle East. Some of those Arkansas vets have contributed their memories, but most have not, just as too few have been honored for their service. So it's their history, their contributions that truly beg to be collected and to be acknowledged. And just about anyone can do it. Collect these memories, these recollections, with just a few pointers that we'll hear about tonight. And we welcome your questions and comments, which you may submit, and we certainly ask you to do that. 1-800-662-2386, a toll-free call. We would happily accept your email at paffairs@aetn.org or through Twitter, #ARAsk. And to get things started, we're going to start in-house. Our first guest, Julie Thomas. She's AETN's Marketing and Outreach Director. You've been steeped in this stuff now for quite a while. It's been your professional life for quite a while.
It has for quite some time, and it's a really worthy project to work on, I have to say. It's been one of the most gratifying projects I think we've had here at AETN in quite some time. A lot of the reason is because this war was so controversial and so many people had different feelings about this war, and we're able to take what Ken Burns has done with a national platform and a national audience and bring it home for Arkansans who served, the families who love them, and all veterans who have an interest in this topic.
Julie, when you started this, were part of it literally outreach, you know, come tell it, who are you? Come tell us who you are. What did you do? Where were you? Where'd you serve? Were you surprised at all by the reaction from vets?
Yes, we really took care and took some time on the front end of this project to talk to veterans, to talk to the VA organizations, to talk to people who were already working with Vietnam veterans and other veterans to say, how do we start this conversation? What are some triggers we need to look for? How can we be the most compassionate, and how can we listen the best to their stories, to their feelings, to their emotions, and make sure that they're taken care of? Because bringing up the past always has an emotional reaction for people, and certainly in a case and in a war where a lot of veterans were not welcomed home and didn't feel like they were loved when they came back. And so we wanted to make sure to be very tender and careful about interacting that way.
Yet nonetheless honest and searching.
That's right. That's right. That's important. And the film that you'll see when you tune in on Sunday is a very in-depth look at this war from all sides.
I'd say, what, 18 hours?
18 hours over 10 episodes. And I think it's going to we're hoping that it spurs a lot of discussion and engagement among families who have not heard the stories before, and from the communities in general who experienced the time.
Based on your interaction with these vets who came forward or made themselves available anyway, why now? And for the first time, for many of these guys and women, this was the first time they've really talked about it. Why now? Did they explain that?
That's a great question, and that's why if you listen to some of the interviews with Ken Burns and Lynn Novak, who made the film, they made it at this time over the past 10 years because they're ready to talk now. It has been something typically we hear that Vietnam veterans do not want to talk to their families about or to the general public about, but they've reached an age where they are talking now. So that's why the film was made when it was made. And we are finding that once we invite them to a safe place with a listening ear, that they do open up. And we have found that their family members have been very grateful for that, for the first time really learning some of the history there.
They were, in a way, some, I suspect, at long last letting go. Is that overstating it?
That's not overstating. I think that's exactly right. I think that a lot of families we've talked to, the veterans did not want to share this painful time in suffering with their families to make them feel sad. And you'll see that in the film, but we've also heard that here, that, you know, my dad never talked about it. He'll talk to my brother or he'll talk to my husband, but he won't talk to me or my mom. And so it is given, the film has given them a way to start the conversation, which many people just never knew what to ask, never knew what to say. And so it's giving them some, I guess, an outlet to kind of discuss that with their family members.
Tell us now how we can participate. How can this audience participate?
There are several ways that Arkansans can participate. Mostly what we're doing and hoping people will do is share their story, not only with AETN, but as part of the bigger project, which you're going to hear about later, the Veterans History Project through the Library of Congress. Senator Boozman's office and some other groups around the state are collecting those stories very strategically and very carefully to archive them and preserve these stories that are so important in our history, at the same time giving these men and women a way to heal, in a way to feel welcomed home, and a way to feel loved. And I think that's where public media and AETN and PBS come in. We can share this great content, this great story from Ken Burns, and then offer a way to open up a dialogue and do this. So sharing your story is a great way to participate. Also, we have a project called Wall of Faces. That's a national project. We're still missing more than 150 photographs of Vietnam veterans killed during the war that are listed on the wall on the National Monument, and we're making a concerted effort to find those photographs and complete that project.
Yeah, but one final thing, this network is collecting, gathering an enormous amount of material that's never been seen before, voices that have never been heard before, pictures that have never been seen before. What are we going to do with them?
That's a great question, too. We've got several stories already on our website. If you want to hear from local Arkansans who served and families who served, AETN.org/the Vietnam War is a great place to go to see those stories. You've got a group of women with the Quilts of Valor making quilts to honor Vietnam veterans. You can nominate a veteran to get a quilt made for them, which is a really moving experience. You'll hear more about that tonight as well. But honestly, sharing the stories is, to us, the most important thing. Is we want to hear the history in your words, what you experienced, and welcome you home and honor that. So we're doing that here. There's a way to do it on our website. You can do it yourself. You can talk to Senator Boozman's office about a workshop for families to train you how to do it properly, which is really important, using the right words and the right questions. Yeah. So it's a really it's a great way to again to honor veterans and love on them a little bit.
Julie Thomas, well done. Thank you very much, and thanks for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
Throughout this evening, we are going to be showing you some examples of oral histories that AETN has been working on. Here's one such history.
We just got back without having any sleep for 3 days, and we came back to Quan Loy, and that night, and we were resting. We weren't online or anything, we were just resting. Quan Loy, which was May 12th, 1969, got overrun. It was a big offensive against Quan Loy. There were enemy that had broken through 10 or 12 bunkers, and they were rallying just inside the fence, getting ready to do whatever their mission was going to be. So we were jumped up, and we were told to push them back into the wire. And so we got there, and we were a blocking force, and then we worked back and forth, and we finally got them all back into our bunkers on the bunker line. And there was Puff the Magic Dragon out, so there were no reinforcements coming in. And
what's Puff the Magic Dragon?
It's a DC-3 that had 3 miniguns on them, and they would lay down a blanket of rounds, like a football field in a 1-second burst or something. Awesome weapon. It was made to stop assaults. It was flying patrol around the whole base camp. And so there was no reinforcements coming in, and we had all of the enemy in the bunker line, and then the next day they could have come in, and tanks could have blown them up, they could have brought in airstrikes, they could have anything. Anyway, they told us to take back the bunker line. So we were fighting our own bunkers, and we got knocked down to 32 guys left. When we rallied the next morning, we had 32 guys left. our company went from probably 120 to 32. I mean, those would be people online, not counting, you know, some of the rear people.
The Library of Congress Veterans History Project collects and preserves those personal accounts of U.S. veterans during the war, and here to talk about how you can participate, retired Colonel Anita Deason is Military and Veterans Liaison for U.S. Senator John Boozman. Dillon Vick is a Veterans History Project volunteer. Olivia Olson, also a Veterans History Project volunteer. Thank you for being part of the program tonight.
Thank you.
And I really don't know where to start. Try this one. How important, there have been whole valleys could be filled with the literature, particularly of Vietnam, but all the wars. So how important is this? Anyone who wants to start? Colonel, we'll start with you.
Sure, it is incredibly important for the veteran themselves. It's a healthy process. It's even more so important to their families, because often they don't hear from their loved one about their experience without some prompting. And this has really opened those doors up for that to happen.
Ms. Olson.
As an educator, it's important for students, for researchers. These stories that the veterans tell go to the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C., and they will be there for perpetuity, as for them to have, you know, when they need the research to be done.
Dillon Vick, how'd you get involved in this?
I was interning for Senator Boozman over the summer, and I was actually assigned to the Veterans History Project specifically, so I managed to work specifically with that throughout the entire summer.
What have you found? What was it like?
Well, I'm a veteran myself, so being able to interact with a lot of these guys who are, you know, significantly older than I am, having that generational connection and the background as far as being veterans as well, is really, you can see it like lighten up their life as far as, you know, having somebody interested in their stories.
It may have lightened their life, but was it difficult for some of them, for many?
There are a few, yes. Some that are a little more difficult than others.
Ms. Olson, you were nodding. I gather you encountered that same sort of...
Yes, I've had, during some of the interviews, you know, the veterans will get emotional, but it's a healing thing as well. And they've always said at the end of the interview that they feel that it's a good thing that they've done, and their families are very happy for them.
Yeah, Colonel, the same question I asked Julie Thomas a second ago. Why now? Why was it just having this opportunity, or did it take so much time, enough time for them to be ready to talk?
For the Vietnam veterans, yes, especially. And I'll give an example. Had a Vietnam veteran to call in July of 15, and said, "I've thought about this for many years, and I think I'm ready to talk." And then he went silent. And it took about a year later, he calls and said, "I'm ready." And when I got to his house, he had just come home from the hospital. And he told his story, and it was so passionate. But at the end of it, he stood up and he said, "That's one of the healthiest things I've ever done for myself."
We'll come back to the panel in just a moment. Quilts of Valor. It's a national foundation national foundation. We are going to go to that in just a second because it's very important, but what we need to do now is show you a promotional that is involved with this project and may help explain it a little bit better.
From the world wars to Korea, Vietnam, to the Persian Gulf, Afghanistan, and Iraq, they saw what few others ever saw. But many veterans don't talk about their experiences. It may be because you've never asked. Learn what you can't always find in the history books. Interview or contribute materials from the veteran in your community for the Library of Congress Veterans History Project. Download a field kit from our website to find out how you can play a role in preserving history.
There it is, but more. We have concentrated the broadcast thus far on Vietnam, but this project isn't only about Vietnam.
Right.
Our involvement, as noted earlier in the broadcast, combat involvement in Vietnam is now almost 4 decades gone. Sadly, American forces have been called to action many times since then. Colonel?
Yes, it's for all branches of service. whether they served 1 day or 40 years. And I wanted to point that out because the literature about the Veterans History Project still talks about war veterans, but actually the Library of Congress has opened it up to anyone who has served at any time.
So we're recording a great deal of history there.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And not just the jungle, but the desert as well, for example, or the mountains of, say, Bosnia, Eastern Europe.
Yes, sir.
Have you been able to accomplish accumulate a great many pieces from those gentlemen and ladies who served in those theaters?
Yes.
Yes, sir. We've got several that are from World War II through Korea, Vietnam, all the way up to Iraqi freedom, even. Just anybody that's willing to open up and share their stories with us, we're more than happy to come to them and
A bit more on the particulars, though. How do you find and identify these individuals? I mean, it sounds easy, but finding them, in fact, may be the easiest part of it, but go ahead.
We hear from veteran service organizations. Probably most often we hear from family members that say, hey, I have a wonderful uncle or a grandfather or a grandmother that I would love for you to interview.
Yeah, my brother, my dad.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah. How do they respond, though, when you contact them?
Well,
your daughter just called and said you might like to talk.
Yes. Most of the time, I don't have to convince them. The families have already, paved the way for me. But a lot of times, for instance, if it's like at the VA, where sometimes I'll go and interview, they're comfortable in those settings. Or if they want to do the interview at their home, they know they'll be more comfortable there. So it's really for their comfort wherever we choose to have the interview.
You are air mobile. Or mobile.
Right.
Anyway. Quilts of Valor, we mentioned it just a moment ago. It's a national foundation which has the mission of covering service members and veterans touched by war with something that's quite literally comforting, as well as quite possibly healing. Here's a look.
This one okay today, Mom? Yeah. Okay, what we're going to be doing.
You've been doing okay, Monkey?
Good. Okay. These have a right and a wrong side. It's hard to tell now. The way I do it is I put it on my leg, my britches leg, and see how much lighter that is.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, when you need to sew 4 of these.
You're the only one who brings me comfort, so won't you please calm me down? And if I tell you I'm worried,
what is it about those gestures that mean so much? How does it get in there?
You know, when I got out of the service, I heard expressions like drug addicts and baby killers, and that's kind of the way that Vietnam veterans were regarded when they first came back from a war, and it was a war.
you're gonna need a bigger chainsaw to cut me down. You're gonna need another horse to drag me round.
And
I need to see a little bit of love before
for people to do special things that recognize these veterans and try to touch them and make them feel that the thing they did is something very much to be proud of, then they've done the things that nobody else seemed to care about doing at the very first part of the war. So I don't know how to say it any other way but that.
you're gonna need a bigger chainsaw to cut me down. You're gonna need another horse to drag me round. I'll need to see a little bit of love before I'll be found. 'Cause I ain't got roots to hold me down.
We've just always wanted to support our troops because it's all about our freedom. And our veterans, they do so much and receive so little. I enjoy doing something for the veterans that is very rewarding. Get this set up and I'll be working on that. This just helps personalize it that it's their quilt of valor. I'm not a quilter. It makes me nervous making quilts. I just made my 5th quilt. I really like the embroidery part, where I can put their name on the pillowcase and put their name on the quilt. And I learned how to cut the little on the eye.
We just like to give these quilts just to say thank you, and just to say that you got a place in our heart. And it's just so special to us to see the work that's put into them and then see the recipient get the quilt. It's very, very touching.
So this is what we're working on today. Is one like this. It's going to be that pattern.
I think it means to them that, although they think people have forgotten what they did, what they sacrificed, they get this quilt and it's tangible. They can hold it and they can see all the work, and then they know that there's so many people involved, not just the people there, not just the people that make the quilt, but the people that do all the other jobs. There's volunteers that do all the other positions. They cook, they provide venues, and they just know that it's from many hands that gets it to them, and they're often overwhelmed by that thought.
Can't you just see a quilt made out of a box like this? What I want to do.
We have sew day once a month, and all ladies comes in. We have usually somewhere around between 10 to, we've had as many as 18 in here. And it's pretty full when we get that many and get that many machines going, but we just have a good time. I fix lunch for the girls, and I fix the main course, and then everybody just brings something, and we just have a great time sewing.
Thank you, Lord, for this beautiful day that you've given to us. Thank you for all the many blessings that you've given to us, Lord. Thank you for everyone that is represented here today. Thank you for the safe travel for everyone, for the safe travel back home. Thank you, Lord, for our freedom and the veterans that we serve to give us that freedom. Thank you for this food and the finances that provided for it. We ask this in Jesus' precious holy name. Amen.
For sweets. For sweets.
A lot of times the people will bring their own machines because it's kind of like driving your own car. You like your own, you know what your machine will do. But then there's other people that don't want to lug their machines, and they'll just sew on the ones that I have. We've gotten some machines that people have donated to us. They've quit sewing or whatever, and they have donated machines, and some of them I pick up at like flea markets. I have a few sewing machines of my own also. I have probably now 12 sewing machines that have been donated to me or that are mine. So.
You make me feel like I've come home. You've got a beautiful soul.
We made a lot of road trips. Usually there's 3 or 4 of us, and we just make the whole day out of it.
And we also have to get fabric and shop for fabric and supplies. We try to buy most of ours wholesale when we can and supplement that with local stores.
And then whenever we go buy fabrics, it's about the same thing because it takes about all day the time you go to Batesville and buy your fabrics and pick out what you like and then eat lunch somewhere, and then it's another hour and a half all the way home. So if we had something that was patriotic, yeah. Okay, where are we going?
Up here, and it's not very many.
Yeah, we've seen that one that we've had before. We've made a lot of road trips to awarding quilts. We award to nursing homes. We've awarded at their homes. We've even awarded at parks, at restaurants. We go anywhere that is convenient for the veteran because we feel like that they have already done their sacrifice and they've already done a lot for us. So we go anywhere that they want to go.
I always say that the award ceremony is the frosting on the cake because just to see these veterans when they receive a quilt is it's very rewarding, and it's just makes your heart sing, you know.
I'm going to appreciate this. I'll cherish it forever.
To make something beautiful out of it, it's just so touching. The pieces that are just joined together and the fabrics that are chosen for that quilt, you know, it's pieces of their life back together. It's comfort. That's what a quilt is made for. It's made for comfort. And it's comfort for warmth and comfort to your heart.
Apparently so. How can I be an historian? I'm not a trained historian, I'm just a guy on the street. Or a woman on the street. Maybe I have a loved one who served. Maybe I'm just curious. How do I participate? How do I get involved? How do I learn how to do this? There are certain steps that probably ought to be followed.
Yes, sir. The Library of Congress.
Don't call me sir, I work for a living.
Heard that before. So the Library of Congress Veterans History Project, they have a website you can go to and you can actually download a field kit. I would encourage them to maybe set up a workshop that we could provide that instruction, and that way they get to learn from us, get to learn from our mistakes. Right. So all they have to do is call Senator Boozman's office to get a workshop set up for their school, for their church, for their organization, their college.
And we have operators standing by right now, willing to take a call, ready to take a call anyway, and we can take the information if you would like a kit and would happily pass that on or provide it from here. Some of the particulars about how do we go about doing this? I mean, you can't just sit down and say, all right, tell me your story. Right. It's a little more subtle than that.
Again, in the field kit, they have sample questions. But once you get to doing it on a regular basis, what I like to do is to give my veterans their interview questions before I actually go. Mm-hmm. That way they're familiar, that kind of breaks the ice. And I've just learned, you know, over the years that that's a good way of having them comfortable with the questions.
And sometimes the interviewer need only, at least in our trade anyway, you need only ask the first question.
That's right.
The second presents itself, or sometimes silence is a question. That's the follow-up question.
Yes. And many times I ask them, perhaps they don't even are comfortable with the question-answer routine. Perhaps they just want to tell their story. They're more comfortable doing it that way. So I give them that opportunity as well.
Yeah, Mr. Vick, you encounter that?
Oh, very often. Many times it would just be an introduction at the very beginning, and then the veteran knows their story, and they're going to go for 2 hours on it alone without any prompt.
Is there a time? Well, that's interesting, 2 hours, and I'm sure you want all of it, but do you try to put a time limit on this, or just
there is
a
minimum?
Come on.
There is a minimum requirement of 30 minutes for the video interview. There's others for, like, if there's writings being submitted to the Library of Congress or pictures alone. But for video interviews, it's a minimum of 30 minutes. But we've had some that have gone as many as 2 hours not more than that. So there's really no time limit other than the minimum.
Yeah, all of this to the Library of Congress.
Yes.
Eventually. Yeah.
Dillon is referring to there's a 30-20-10 rule, and that's a minimum of 30 minutes of audio or video interview, or 20 pages of original pages from a journal, a diary, something along those lines, or 10 original photographs. Any of that constitutes a hitting all the requirements to be submitted to the Library of Congress.
Now, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it doesn't have to be all of those either. It can be each individual one. So if you only have a 30-minute video, you can submit 1 or 2 pictures. That's fine. So it's not all of it all at the same time. So just make that clear.
When we're talking about audiovisual memory, so recollection, the stuff of history, maybe a great many viewers of this program, vets, are worried, wait a minute, this stuff's pretty precious. Is it going to have to leave my house? Are you going to duplicate it somewhere else? How do I know I'll get it back? Irreplaceable to them.
Right. They do require originals for if you do submit the 10 photographs. And so that's why most of the people that I do interview do just the audio or the video portion. They choose not to let go of their pictures. But it's the Library of Congress, and they, if they want those kinds of pictures, they want the originals.
Yeah, so a scan won't work.
There's sometimes little tricks you can do, though. If the veteran's not willing to part with the pictures, then like what Anita and I used to do is we would record the pictures and lay them out on a table and record them. So there's other ways to get the pictures in if they're not willing to part with them.
That's right.
Right. Preserving those oral histories is, of course, just central to the project. And one Pinero Fisher is a gentleman, now a resident of Jacksonville, Arkansas, a native of Saline County, who very generously shared his story, and we're going to see part of it right now.
My name, Pinero Fisher, branch of service, United States Air Force. Time in Vietnam, late '63 till fall of 1969. I lived in Benton, Arkansas, and we only had a school for black students that went to the 6th grade. Since I was not allowed to go to the Benton Junior High School or the Benton High School, they had to bus me to Little Rock. Well, I graduated from the 11th grade. Somewhere along that line, I don't know if it was burnout, I didn't see much going for me at that time. I had a talk with a recruiter, kind of a short talk. Now, this was in 1950, and I have to tell you, from 1950 to 1954 was my first hitch. Came back in 1959. I guess the only time I got my first-class citizenship, because we were considered second-class citizens as far as black people were concerned, particularly here in some of the other states, was when I joined the military. When we met, I say we, it must have been 30, 40 new Air Force recruits. We were put on a train for San Antonio, Pullman cars, I mean overnight accommodations. We were all assigned different sleeping accommodation. And they started to mix us up right there on that train. So when we got to San Antonio, Texas, we were all just recruits. No blacks, no whites, no Mexicans, no Latinos, no Italians. So it was more interesting than it was, let's say, intimidating, if you will. When I got the assignment to Vietnam, I still didn't take that as a scary situation, because I'd been in a bit of the Korean War. From 66 to late 67, I was assigned to a gunship squadron in Vietnam on the AC-47. It's a C-47 converted to gunner. Puff the Magic Dragon, they called us. Spooky, 2 nicknames. When you put one of the guns on line, it's like water hoses squirting red soda out of it. It's fast firing, 7,000 rounds a minute. You put 3 guns on line, and you could liberate this house in one short burst. We had instances where our patrol guys would get trapped or whatever, and they need some help. You know, keep the enemy's heads down or destroy them if you can. so we can get our guys out of there. The Silver Star. The C-47 has a pair of doors that open on the left side, way back toward the very end of the aircraft. Well, in the gunship, they left the rear door on there, took the forward door off. They mounted a gun right there in that door. It's not the most comfortable thing to throw flares out of. We had a flare launcher over here, but it didn't work half the time. It was too slow. So the engineer would come back and help the loadmaster launch those flares. Standing in this door between the gun and the door, he would set the flare up, and if there was a little pause, because you got to make a big circle or you do something, you don't just throw them out. You know, we had our space and we like to get them. And I heard this thing go, whoop, and the flare fell. He had it up to hand to me, and I'm going to pivot around and throw it out the door. When I look around, you hear that flare clanking back in there. You don't have a lot of room behind you. You got a box here with flares in it. The engineer's standing behind you. If he take 2 steps backward, he's against the other wall. That's how small that aircraft is. So we got all the lights out. The only light we got is a rotating beacon on the vertical stabilizer. And when that thing went off, I knew that was it, but I didn't want to believe that was it. I immediately got this parachute all around the back of me, but there's a flare under it somewhere, and I got to find the flare. So I'm grabbing parachute, and I got my hands on the flare and got it to a point where I gathered that and enough stuff to throw it out the door. And it went out, but it hit the slipstream and went immediately in that direction. Now, the shroud lines, that's the thing that connect the canopy to the flare, catches in that little gap at the door. The canister is floating around. It's kind of moving up and down in the slipstream. The chute still hung in the door, partially out of the door. I got to find the shroud lines to cut them loose. I just went to work. It's just training, reaction, and what you need to do when you need to do it. I get my knife out, and it's bright now. If Charlie got a target, he's got one now. And with me hanging out the door, I finally got it to just go out that way. I can't think of what was on my mind except cutting the line, but there was a lot of confusion in here. So when I crawled backwards on my knees and pulled myself up in the gun, I think I kicked the last piece of parachute out. I think it was the engineer or the gun. I'm not sure which now, I don't remember. Stuck a cigarette in my mouth. I was standing there holding on to the gun. I still had the knife in my hand. Never lost that knife. I took a drag of that cigarette. That's probably the best cigarette drag I ever had. One thing about Vietnam, you learn to get along with somebody, a lot of somebodies, because if you don't, it's a disaster. That's one thing you learn. You really learn teamwork, and you meet a lot of interesting people. Pilots, navigators, flight engineers, they all come from everywhere. But the crew you're assigned to, you generally create a really tight bond. I can say one thing about military duty. Once you make a friend, you're pretty much friends for life.
I suspect you've had situations where a friend refers a friend to you or refers you to a friend of his and say, you know, old Charlie may have something to say. Does that work often?
Yes, sir. That's how I was introduced to Mr. Pinero Fisher. Yes, sir.
Okay.
We're in the same American Legion post together, but I had not had the pleasure to meet him yet, and the commander brought him to my attention, and he was remarkable.
Yeah, go back a little bit before that, and how did all of you become so involved? Obviously, you're involved, but you're involved in this. Miss Olson, let's start with you. How did this come to be such a part of your life?
Well, in 2006, I am a member of the DAR and in Fayetteville, and a lady that was a chapter member with me, Mary Cotton, had been doing these interviews with the Veterans History Project since the beginning days of the project. And she took me aside one day and said, would you be interested in doing this? And I thought about it. At the time, I was still teaching, and I thought, well, I'll get started. I'll start with my family, and that's exactly what I did. I did family members first, and then as the years progressed, and especially since retirement, I have found that I can't stop. Once I hear their stories, I just want to get more and more, and it's just a wonderful project.
Yeah, Mr. Vick?
Well, like I said before, I started interning for the senator this summer, but actually getting involved in the interviews and having like the children or family members of the veterans come up and say that they had never heard some of these stories that are being told by their family member. It really touched me, and that's important. I had a grandfather that served in the military in the European theater during World War II. And after I joined the Navy, I started getting a little more interested in his military service, but I had never asked a whole lot of questions when I was younger, just didn't have that interest then. My dad and some of his brothers, they know a little bit, but not the whole story. And I regret not ever getting that. So having an opportunity to go and do this for some people that, they might not think of it at the time, but it's something that's really valuable later in life that, looking back on it, it's definitely worth it.
And you gave the military 20 years, so your interest is obviously, it's manifest.
Well, that's correct. However,
at least 20.
Yes. I actually got a call that said Senator Boozman wants you to get more Arkansans involved in this project. And then the senator shared his story. His father was a waist gunner during World War II in the Army Air Corps, and then later retired as a master sergeant in the Air Force. And he died, I think, at around age 68. And the senator told me, I never really asked him all those questions about his experience, and I regret that, and I hope that we can help someone else avoid that. But when he shared that story with me, it basically gut-kicked me, because I lost my own father right after my 19th birthday, and he served in World War II in the Navy. And I never really asked him anything, and I never even said thank you.
Well, maybe you are now.
That's my hope.
In the instance of relatives, kin, who may have lost a brother, a sister, a father, sometimes they leave behind documents or other stuff of their service history. Their medals, their letters, and that's happened to you in an especially poignant way, or you came across this.
Yes, there was a gentleman that called the office and wanted to share his story, and it turns out he had put together a book for his family, and you can submit unpublished works. And so what he provided, let me go back and say how it was found. His father was drafted during World War II, and there were 5 children, and he was 35 when he was drafted. And so he comes back from World War II. He's killed in a car accident 2 years later. The mother raised all the children on her own. The mother, many years later, she dies in her 80s. And as the children are cleaning out her bedroom, under her bed, they find a box full of, I believe it's like 231 love letters from their father. And so the next 20 years, the son, it's a labor of love how he put this book together. And as things became declassified, he added those things in there because many of the letters had been redacted. But just a beautiful, beautiful tribute to his father.
Practically a book in and of itself.
Absolutely.
And the project would accept all of that.
That is correct, as long as it's unpublished.
Right. Now, that material would be what? Photographed at the Library of Congress, and then the originals returned to him, for example, or the family.
In that case, we were actually able to get one of the books and just submit it to the Library of Congress, and they accepted that.
Fantastic. We have talked about the kits that are available and that actually are essential, and we have a graphic, I think, that we can put up there. Would one of you care to describe exactly what's in this and how we use this, how an individual would use this? Ms. Olson.
All right, I'll get started, and you all can help me out here.
Well, you're the pro historian. So,
first of all, inside the field kit, you're going to find an opening page about what the Veterans History Project is, how to get involved, There are, of course, the actual forms to fill out, which would be the veterans release form, of course, the biographical data sheet, and all the required forms that you need. And then you'll have things like the questions and answers. I believe that's on there. If not, it's at least on the website. But you will have all kinds of information to get you started. And can you think of anything else that I maybe forgot?
Mm-hmm. It's all in there.
Yes.
It is all in there. And you don't have to have, you can make copies of this and submit to the Library of Congress, so you don't have to have the original every time.
Yeah. And Mr. Vick, these are not hard and fast rules. These are certainly things that are included in the kit here or suggested in the kit, that things that any historian would certainly hope would be covered, but you're not bound to that, absolutely.
No, not necessarily. So the questions they give to you is just an idea, and you can use them for that, kind of map out what you want to do, how you want to navigate the interview. But you know as just well as anybody is, once the interview gets started, it can take it, its own
Let
story.
it go where it wants to go.
And there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah. What's the longest one that you've done?
Over 2 hours. I believe it was about almost 2.5 hours.
And with who?
It was a retired sergeant major with the Arkansas National Guard, and just broke so many ceilings as a female in the Arkansas Army National Guard, and incredible interview.
Right. Another excerpt from an interview with a gentleman who is going to share with us some memories of his time in Vietnam.
We had a vice principal that was a major in the reserves, and he grabbed a hold of a bunch of us guys and told us we need a structure in our lives. So he actually asked us to enlist in his Marine Corps Reserve unit, and we did. And upon graduation, I went on active duty. I remember my drill sergeant come in the first day when we got to receiving barracks and kind of looked at us and called us all kinds of good names. And went down the line and asked people where you were from. And after a while, we found out, don't say you're from Texas. I got assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. If you make 5 jumps perfect, you qualify as a paratrooper. And usually I have a percentage rate about, probably about 60% fail.
Really?
Yes, sir. My earlier assignment was a light weapons leader in an A team. I was there for 18 months. Working the Cambodian border on search and destroy missions. I had 2 recon missions in Laos that we got in trouble, and we came out okay, but we got the word from our CEO to continue on with what we're doing, and I told him, no, we've got to compromise, we're coming out. So we came out. I went to Thailand, 46 Special Force Company for 2 years in Thailand. We're training Cambodians to go back to Cambodia and fight the NVA.
Fred, when you came home from Vietnam, many who came home from Vietnam were not welcomed, to say the least. What was your treatment like when you returned to the United States from Vietnam?
Like everybody else, especially when I was assigned to the National Guard in Denver, Colorado. I had to escort the colonel around, and it got so bad that I started carrying, not nunchucks, but a little pool cue about that big in the sedan. I got yelled at, I got spit at, people turned their back on me when I got on the airport. So you had to bite your tongue, and you had to hold your emotions, because I'd have gone to jail. I just got back from Vietnam. I know what it was like to fight and hurt somebody. And I said, can't do it. I got a family, 3 kids. I came back from Vietnam, even my family never asked me, what did I do? I have brothers and sisters, never asked me what I did.
Why do you think that's the case?
They couldn't understand. Most of us were drafted back in the 50s. Some of us stayed, some of us didn't, but we all served our country. And I think everybody should have at least 2 years of any military service, whether it's it's the Peace Corps, or whether it's Army, Navy, Air Force, I don't care, but at least 2 years.
Why do you think so?
So they can see what the culture's like. I mean, get out of your world, of your own world. See what the rest of the world's like. See what the rest of the United States is like. I bet you got people here in Arkansas never been out of Arkansas. I did what my country told me, and I don't have no regrets. I would do it over again. There is no brotherhood like the service for your country.
Yeah. A true band of brothers.
Yes, sir.
And we're back. Do you think, we've sort of focused, understandably so, I think, on Vietnam vets tonight. Do you think it will take, those of you of recent service, will it take as long for the vets of, say, Desert Storm, or the current involvement in the Middle East, or in Eastern Europe who served in Eastern, will it take them as long, do you think? Do you have you evolved, do you have a sense of how they deal with it now?
I think the country as a whole is kind of starting to understand. We experienced Vietnam and just saw how wrong that was. So I kind of feel like the country as a whole is moving in a better direction as far as treating its veterans. But doing stuff like this, like I have a little quick story about, we were doing an interview with Garland Gable, who told us about after coming home from World War II, going to a town hall and asking a senator there, why when he returned home from World War II, why did the men, did they not talk about their experiences? And the senator's response to him was basically, he just told him, I think we were just ready to move on and forget. And I think that set a precedent in a way where we saw Korean War veterans and Vietnam War veterans coming home just not talking about a lot of these things. And we're seeing it now a lot with these Iraqi freedom and enduring freedom veterans, where we've had the rise in the PTSD, or at least the awareness of it. And I think that doing projects like these really open up these guys to talk more about it, and hopefully kind of leads in a lighter direction than where some of these have in the past.
So we have, as a country, I think it answers itself, but we have more or less stopped equating the veteran with the war.
Right.
The warrior with the war.
Right.
Did you encounter, Colonel, a lot of that, or Ms. Olson, anyone, in your interviews with Vietnam veterans in particular? Were there a lot of unpleasant memories that they shared upon returning home?
Yes, but they've moved on. I mean, at least the ones I've interviewed.
Or no longer captive to it.
Right. And I had one Vietnam veteran that noticed a difference between his two tours. His first tour was early in the war, and he was not treated, poorly when he came home with that first tour. But he said it was a much different experience when he came back after the second tour. But they've gone on. They're ready, I think, to tell their stories.
I'm very proud of all of our veterans, but the Vietnam veterans, some of them came home to a nation that didn't love them. But our Vietnam veterans went ahead and loved our country back anyway. And they made sure that legislation was improved for our veterans. They've improved things in our VAs. They have reached out especially to our Operation Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom veterans to ensure that they're well taken care of and well informed. And so when I first got in the military, it was those Vietnam veterans that were our trainers and our leaders, and they really tried to make a difference.
Did they?
I believe so, yes.
What do we need to talk about in the last? We've got a couple of minutes remaining here. Have we covered this thing pretty well? What have we left out? What have I left out?
One thing we could bring up is that it's not just adults that can interview veterans. We can get schools involved. As long as you are in the 10th grade or above, you can interview a veteran. However, you can, even in elementary schools, get the students excited about interviewing a veteran. They may not actually be able to do the interview, but they could do the pre-interview process, which is that form that's the biographical form, where they ask the questions before the interview. And so in that way, they are getting excited and hearing these just these experiences with the older generations.
Yeah, and it spreads the news gathering net, as it
right,
as it were. Has this been very rewarding for you individuals?
Oh, incredibly. Incredible. I'm still doing it. You learned
from it.
Yeah, you know, like I said, I started as an intern. You know, this was just a summer internship, not just summer internship, but a summer internship that, you know, I was taking serious. But now that it's over and I'm still involved, I mean, it just shows like how impactful it can be. And it's really rewarding.
Yeah, you'd do it again.
Definitely.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. This has become a passion. It has touched my life. You go into the interview thinking you're going to do something for this veteran, and you walk away with, oh my goodness, that veteran just touched my heart. Also, Olivia brought up about students. Eagle Scouts. This is a great Eagle Scout project. It's great for Girl Scouts for the Gold Award. This project can be pretty much as small or as large as you want to make it. And I must compliment the Library of Congress Veterans History Project staff. I have called them with many questions over the last couple of years, and they've always found a way to turn what would maybe normally be a no answer into a yes by providing me a different way to approach a situation. They have just been wonderful.
Good. Let's take a look now at a brief, very brief promotional announcement for, as we mentioned earlier, the Ken Burns 18-hour, I think 17 or 18-hour documentary on Vietnam, a mammoth undertaking, begins Sunday night here on AETN, and we've got a quick preview.
I thought I knew most of what was worth knowing about the war, and suddenly I didn't.
Something was happening that was profound, that was irreversible.
What was it all about? Was it worth it?
Smart people in pinstripes could make their minds up about the war.
It was extremely traumatic, like the ground was suddenly cut from under you.
We just tried to believe that this was the right thing to do.
Vietnam War from all sides. Superlative work. Superlative guests. Thank you all very much for being with us, and good luck with the project.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. See you next time.